Hello and welcome back to the channel, and thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Today we are going to talk about something which I don't normally talk about. It's not sort of my area of expertise, and that is things like aliens and UFOs, close encounters of the third kind, as they used to say. And I know that they've changed the name of UFOs to another three letters, which I can never get my head round because having been brought up in the 70s, that was the sort of thing that people referred to. My guest today is going to be helping me discuss all of this, has had personal witness accounts of UFOs, and also wants to talk about 0 point energy, which is one of those things that a few people have mentioned to me, and I've gone, I'm not quite sure what that is. I'll have an open mind, put it on the side. So I'm very thrilled to be able to discuss and find out all about it. My guest is Simon Domville-Musters, who joins me now. Hello, Simon.
Hello, Richard. Lovely to be with you.
It's lovely to be with you, and thank you so much. So it says here on the notes I took just before we started, you're a retired chappie. You nearly died, which always is interesting, from as everybody has got to go through that at some point. Well, presumably actually die. And you're an ex-businessman, and you've been studying on and off UFOs and this sort of stuff for a long time.
Yes.
Yes. So, where should we? Well, let's start with the nearly dying bit first, because that's that's really gripped me.
Right. 2.5 years ago, maybe a bit more, I was busy working and living in Sofia, Bulgaria, and unbeknownst to me, I had a circulation problem, which meant that I couldn't walk anymore. I couldn't stand up, and if I fell over, I couldn't get back up, and nothing was working at all. And I'd been to about four doctors and two clinics and I don't know what. So I was repatriated to the UK in extremis and spent a year recovering, basically. Um, and so uh, I'm now able to walk and get around and do my shopping and keep house and all the rest of it. But it was very, very difficult. But this meant that I was not able to work. And so it did leave me a lot of time to do something constructive. And I have my own little channel, The Ranting Revolutionary. And I think you've seen my little podcast on the censorship in council meetings and this sort of thing.
Yes.
But I also go into our origins and I do topics that are that I find absolutely compelling. Yeah,
Yes.
and so UFOs or UAPs, which is a
UAPs.
way
That's the
of
one.
appropriating the culture, unidentified aerial phenomenon. It's just a way of appropriating the culture, and of course, not actually doing anything about the subject,
Right.
because the most obvious question is, okay, how do they get here?
Yes. Yes. No. Absolutely. And we'll go on to that. So I'm still curious about the nearly dying bit.
Right. Yeah. Um,
So what when you say you nearly died, I mean, was that an accident, or was that just that the health business that overcame you, or
I literally was incapable of virtually anything. I was
right?
bedbound, and
Yes.
quite honestly, I wanted to die. And I have um, a burden of guilt because a friend of mine based in England, whom I've known since childhood, was actually helping arrange the repatriation. And he's married with two lovely daughters. Um, and everything was going well for him. He was actually uncovering a scam going on with the Home Office on COVID, uh, with a subcontractor based in Ireland, definitely not doing their job, taking American bank holidays, Irish bank holidays, and British bank holidays. And the stats on COVID were definitely being sabotaged. And he's an IT guy. He was. Anyway, whilst he's helping me get back from Bulgaria to the UK, he actually died in his sleep.
Oh
So I have a
gosh.
burden of guilt on that. And if I'm alive today, it's very much thanks to him and another friend uh, who was based in Bulgaria, who also made sure I got home and took me to the airport and everything. But no, I was I had these really bad circulation problems, which I didn't know about at the time, and which, oddly enough, hadn't been diagnosed, despite the fact that I'd gone through all the right things.
Yes.
It diagnosed, it wasn't diagnosed properly. I did not, thank goodness, have the COVID vaccine.
Good for you.
So that was one saving grace out of it. And then it did take me a year to learn to walk again and all the rest of it. And I had a birthday on the 23rd of January this year, and I took a very nice lady out for lunch because she was one of the people who helped re-educate my body and everything and kept my morale up. She was an absolute wonderful person. We had a nice lunch. Um, at the time, there were these sort of drone objects that weren't identified. And finally, on the 28th of January this year, Donald Trump said, "Oh, they're research. Nothing else, just research."
Right.
Um, so basically, looking around and listening to a lot of experts on the subject, it would appear that these new drones are reverse engineered technology. And the reason I can safely go along with that, having followed Dr. Stephen Greer, who really is an expert on the subject of UFOs and UAPs, is because they don't behave like any factory made drone. They
Right.
last, they can hover for far longer. They have far more maneuverability skills. And these could be reverse engineered from ET technology, which is the take of Dr. Stephen Greer. And honestly, uh, having seen the other research by other people, including retired aeronautics engineers and others, uh, there is definitely a case for that because normal drones, the ones that are currently being used, for instance, in the Ukrainian war, emit and transmit uniquely on Hertzian wavelengths, whereas this retired US Air Force engineer has proved that the UAP drones do not emit or receive on Hertzian wavelengths. Um, they also have a factory setting, which I didn't know about, and that is that all drones, whether they're military or civil, when they have a reception problem, immediately have a default mode, which is return to base or return home, right?
Right. Yeah.
Which apparently these unidentified ones did not have, according to the research of this retired avionics engineer. And the other thing was the fact that they're not on Hertzian wavelengths. So those two factors did bring in the possibility of this being reverse engineered technology, which means that they are ours and we have taken something from another source.
So that would assume then that these originally must have come here from somewhere for us to have reverse engineered.
Absolutely. And how do they get here?
Yes. So
That's
what,
the most
what does
obvious
your what
question.
does your research tell us about that?
Um, that well, it's quite fascinating because if when a certain US general many years ago was informed about the UFO phenomenon, his first reaction was, "That's one hell of a supply line," which is a very logical
Yeah.
reaction.
Well, I suppose so.
Yeah, right. I mean,
Yes, of course.
right. Uh, then when one actually looks into uh, the whole space-time dilemma, because the speed of light is in 3 dimensions your speed limit for the universe, right? And the speed of light is 300,000 kilometers per second, if I remember correctly. And that is basically your universal speed limit in 3 dimensions.
Right.
So if you, to, to make a simple analogy, take Star Trek,
Yeah.
they go warp speed, right? Which is faster than the speed of light. And then they multiply it by 1, 2, 3, 4, up to warp speed, whatever, right? What you have is actually you're creating a wormhole. You're creating a hole in the space-time fabric, or tunnel, if you like,
Right.
and you're then projecting yourself through that, but you're not conforming to 3D physics. It's another set of physics.
Yes.
Now, in order to do that, you have to have an energy source because everything is electromagnetic in this universe. Everything. We can call it vibration as well, but it actually boils down to electromagnetic. And it's a field. And when you reason in terms of electromagnetic field, and you take it out of a 3D context, you then have this possibility of going faster than the speed of light, which is how they do get here and how they get home, obviously, as well.
Yes. Wherever home might be.
You mentioned Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Mm.
Back in the 70s, when I was 15, the whole of East Grinstead and part of West Sussex, Sharpthorne, West Heatherley, etc., saw the craft straight out of the film. It was cathedral-like. It was multicolored. It was absolutely stunningly beautiful. It was recorded on the air traffic control radar at Gatwick Airport, both civil and military. When you, it's quite interesting. In Britain, you rarely see military aircraft in a civil airport, whereas when you go abroad, you will often see a mix of military and civil aircraft at the same airport. So it's quite strange for us to imagine civil aircraft mixing with military aircraft, but it is quite frequent. So it's not surprising at all that both the radar systems confirmed this. At the time, we had 2 independent newspapers, the East Grinstead Courier and Observer. They were independent of each other and they weren't owned by one major news corporation. They actually did 2 articles for 2 days tracing this wonderful, beautiful UFO. So you had witnesses who were agricultural laborers, you had council workers, you had doctors, lawyers, dentists, everybody who was near a window or outside at the time it was going by, and these papers traced the route, right? So it was everybody, all levels of society, including school children and housewives, were witness to this. Now,
Yes.
was this on local radio? No. Was it mentioned on local or regional TV? No. Was it mentioned nationally? No. But fortunately, for 2 days, the local papers were allowed to run the story. And then there was a clampdown. There was
Right.
a total clampdown. Nothing was mentioned thereafter.
Gosh. Now, what time of day was this?
This was after school, so it would have been between 4 and 6 o'clock in the evening, and it was very, very beautiful. And we had a large garden at the time with beautiful cedar trees, and we were worried that it might actually burn the trees. But there was, yes,
There's an alien spacecraft, but yeah, what about my trees?
that's right. Yes, yes, that was my
Yes.
thought. Yeah. Um,
We
and
are so parochial, aren't we?
yes, we
You
are.
know,
We are. Yeah.
visitors from outer space. Yeah, you can park wherever you like, but please mind the trees. Thanks very much.
That's right. Yes.
Oh, how extraordinary. So yes, so this was covered by all the local press, and presumably lots of people do remember this then from
Oh,
the
absolutely.
70s.
Yeah.
Yeah, even though there was then a blackout afterwards, and no explanation what it might be.
None whatsoever. And it was quite funny because this beautiful craft had golden sparks coming off it, but
Wow.
no heat and
Right.
no noise. It was completely silent. All right. This is
And how big would you estimate it was in relation to its height? Because I
it
mean, if it's
was
coming down to your trees, you know, worrying
yeah,
about your trees, it was pretty low.
yes, it was very low. I mean it really, and when it moved, it was almost like 3 frames at a time, and then it would move on again, then 3 frames at a time and move on. It wasn't a wonderful, slow, smooth flow. It was this sort of 3 frame sort of bunny hopping. Um,
Right.
it
So
was almost
definitely
as if
not a
it was having
balloon.
trouble being in our dimension. But no
Ah.
heat, no noise,
Yeah.
no pollution, and it was, to answer your question, about 3 times higher than it was wide, and it did have cathedral-like proportions, and it was beautifully multicolored, just like the film Close Encounters.
And was some sort of overly shape, smooth
On
shape.
the base was a round disc shaped from looking up from the bottom, but there was a huge structure on top of that.
Oh
And
right.
as I say, it was cathedral-like.
Oh, I see. So like pointy and
Yes, yes.
not aerodynamic that like we would imagine something.
No,
How fast that's unusual, isn't it? Because everybody talks about these round, spherical, smooth, cigar-shaped stuff. But if you've effectively got a church floating above you, that is something surreal.
it is beautiful as well. And
Yes.
yes, lots of people do remember it. And oddly enough, before my friend died, I used to speak to him a lot on FaceTime. And one day in the conversation, I said, "Oh, do you remember when we saw the UFO in the garden?" And he said, "Yes, absolutely. He did remember it. And yes, it was beautiful." Um, but you see, once again, the first question is, what's the energy source to
Mm.
have something as huge as that gently going over the English countryside, right? How do you keep that thing airborne with no visible motorizations, right? Now,
Yes.
it's very interesting because when you speak to people who actually been inside UFOs, they say that it's even bigger on the inside
So like a
than on the
TARDIS.
outside. And believe it or not, the Book of Enoch also says the same thing. Now, the Book of
Oh,
Enoch was discovered with the Red Sea Scrolls back
yes.
in the 40s. It took a long time for academia to finally release this to the public, and it is written in a form of Amharic, which is a bit difficult. But uh, Enoch actually does describe going up in a spacecraft.
Wow.
And we know that because we can compare that to the 20th and 21st century descriptions of people who've been in spacecraft. And one of the researchers on this subject whom I really admire and appreciate is a guy called Preston Dennett. And he's got loads and loads of cases of people being taken aboard and having very nice conversations, some of them verbal and some of them telepathic, right? And even people coming back with souvenirs like books, bits of metal, all sorts of other things. And when they speak to the authorities about it, the authorities say, "Oh, yes, well, we'll give you a receipt, but we need to analyze it." And it disappears.
Yes. Good gracious. Yeah. So if you've got a book from an alien,
Yeah,
I would be inclined not to tell them.
exactly. But you're always hoping for a translation.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's true. Here's a book. It's like, yeah, does anyone know
Yeah,
UFOnian? Um, so this is. I mean, so we're not alone in
definitely
this
not. And
in this. In,
they've been with us for the beginning of humanity. Now,
right.
we currently have the technology to create a virgin birth. We've had it for about 30 odd years, or immaculate conception, if you like. Now, the researcher here I'm going to quote is a wonderful man called David Wilcock, who has been through a very bad personal phase recently, but did some brilliant research back in the beginning of the 2000s. He wrote a bestseller, and he was really riding high right up until about 2014. But he actually stumbled across laser technology, uh, absolutely brilliant, whereby you could actually use photos of human DNA, not only for the purposes of reproduction, but also for medical healing. Two examples. One Russian professor was crossing chickens and ducks, which doesn't sound really like one would want to cross a chicken and a duck. But the point is that he was doing it without any physical or surgical intervention. So he'd take the DNA of a male chicken and laser it into the egg of Madame Duck, and he would get a hybrid chicken duck who did not suffer, right, and lived out its life, being a half chicken, half duck. Um, and then vice versa,
Right.
taking the male duck and putting it into a chicken egg and also creating a hybrid. Now, this is where you can get your immaculate conception from. You don't have to do in vitro. You don't have to remove the female ovary, put it in a test tube, and then get the male to produce some sperm and then put them together and then put the fertilized ovary back in the female. You could actually leave her all alone, and you just have to point the laser at the right place with the right
Right.
photo.
Yes.
Now, this has wonderful implications for health. And another Russian professor working in a hospital in Siberia was using this technology for dentistry purposes. And just one example of his work was that a granny came in with a molar that needed extracting, which he did. But he then said, I want you to come back with a member of your family with whom I can compare your blood and her blood to make sure your DNA is compatible. And then I'm going to take a photo of their molar and I'm going to laser it into that so that you don't have to have false teeth or an implant. It will naturally grow back. So Granny was very open-minded and said, great, no problem. So she brought back her granddaughter, whose DNA, as it happened, turned out to be compatible. But if it hadn't been, they could have found another relative until they found somebody. So anyway, it worked out that it was compatible. So he took the photo of the young daughter's molar, the granddaughter's molar, and then he lasered it into the right place for grandma. And in just a few days, she called the doctor up and said, yeah, I've got a molar growing. What do you think his reward was for such a wonderful breakthrough?
A fruitcake or something. I mean, if it was a little old granny, I have no idea.
He got fired.
He got fired.
Yeah.
Right.
So you
Yeah.
see, we are at the stage where the utility of chemical-based synthetic molecule drugs is now very limited. They do have their place. They are a good stopback. But we now have the technology where we can actually cure people
Yes.
without surgery, hacking and hewing and sewing up and all the rest of it. And we can also do without the synthetic molecule-based drug, many of which, by the way, are derivatives from oil.
Yes. Yes, these petrochemicals. When you talked about the Immaculate Conception, then it seemed to me, I don't know whether this is possible, but would that also enter into the murky world of cloning?
Yes, definitely.
You've taken
Exactly.
somebody's
I mean,
DNA
there is
and
always a downside.
yes,
One's kitchen knife is wonderful for chopping up onions, but if
yes,
put in the hands of a psychopath, it can be a terrible instrument of murder as well.
yes, absolutely. And I suppose the more amazing the the tool,
Mm,
the more devastating could be the result in the wrong hands.
absolutely, yeah.
And I suppose if the government were or governments were to be pushed and say, why haven't we got this technology, that would be the trope that they would come out with. Well, we couldn't possibly let this loose on the thing because too many bad eggs would create a serious problem.
I
And that may have an element of truth to it, of course. But the flip side is that it would have so much benefit to us. Plus the fact there's the profit,
That's
that
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is probably the main driving force to any of it. But they'll come up with any excuse. You mentioned 0 point energy.
Mm.
Now I assume that this is connected to all of this.
Yes, this is a discovery by Nikola Tesla back over 100 years ago. So we've lost a century,
Yes.
and he'd worked out how to draw from the universe the latent energy that is within the electromagnetic sphere of not only our little planet, but the universe itself. And he used technology very similar to pyramid technology, always built on an aquifer. He had these two towers. The New York one was Warden Cliff, and then there was one in LA. And he was going to extract the energy and use it as well for Wi-Fi purposes. Now, he patented the first smartphone back in 1926. Uh,
Blimey.
yeah. And for instance, Niagara Falls, the first generators that were created there were his. And alternating current is Nikola Tesla, which they don't teach you in schools. Um, so he's got a whole list of inventions. But 0 point energy actually has been patented by the US government. It is a free to use patent with a working model. And the engineer, well respected aeronautical engineer, his name is Salvador Pais. And you can look this up. And this patent is available for use, for public use, which, given that the Patent Office spent nearly 100 years censoring and stopping 0 point energy, is a complete volte-face. And the reason they did that was so that no one country could have a monopoly on it. Now, no one's taken it up, which is really interesting when I think of Elon Musk, all right? Why
Mm.
is he still using liquid fuel rockets? We've got there's a lovely case by Preston Dennett going back to the early 20th century, where it's uh, two gentlemen who are looking, oh, prospectors. They're mineral prospectors, right? And they're in the middle of nowhere, and this craft comes down, and they have a nice chat verbally the um, with the prospectors. They take them aboard, they show them the insides of their craft, and they say, "Oh, this is just the scout ship. We have bigger." But and they're saying this in the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. But don't waste your time with rockets. Do
Right.
not waste your time with rockets. They hadn't
Yes.
even invented the rocket at
They
that
hadn't
stage,
invented
right?
it.
But they're already telling us don't
Yeah, don't waste your
waste
time with that
your time with
technology.
rockets, right? So you see, you get these wonderful bits of truth coming out if you actually take the time to go through the cases. Now, I really do recommend that your listeners look up Preston Dennett. He's got wonderful broadcasts every week where he gets all sorts of cases together, which is just the tip of the iceberg. He's also written 30 books, so I would definitely recommend getting hold of those if you can. The other person who has an enormous website and 35 years of very intense research is Dr. Stephen Greer, whom they've tried to assassinate twice, by the way.
Gosh, have they?
Um, his website is 1.5 teras, which is enormous. I have been on it and I really do enjoy navigating through it. Um, Now, Stephen Greer, they tried to bribe him, tried to bribe his wife. He said, no, thank you. She said, no, thank you. He did lose an assistant. They tried radiation poisoning. And recently he had a car accident. And the person investigating the car accident died in mysterious circumstances. So you see, there is vested interest in keeping 0 point energy away from the public. Now,
Right.
0 point energy has the advantage that it's completely non-polluting. It's ever renewable. It doesn't. You can't use it up. It's like
Yeah.
going down the Atlantic Ocean with a teaspoon, and by the time you've brought the teaspoon up to face level, what that which you've removed has already been replaced, right? I
Yes.
mean, so there's no pollution. The only side effect with 0 point energy is anti-gravity. You can
Right.
also make an anti-gravity vehicle using 0 point energy, which also explains how you have UFOs going in and out of the water, in and out of our atmosphere, going in space, coming back in, all the rest of it. They have anti-gravity technology. They know how to make a field around the aircraft so that it is safe from whatever, atmosphere proof, waterproof, all the rest of it. Um, so we've had this technology for over 100 years. Now,
Let me just throw this at you, just as a wild thing, because it's just suddenly when you use the term anti-gravity, I immediately think of H.G. Wells' The First Men in the Moon, and Professor Cavor, who designed this sphere, paints a solution, an anti-gravity solution, which enables it to take off. So no rockets, no everything, and it's all very clean. And I've heard rumours and things about H.G. Wells, that he was a Freemason and various things and knew certain secrets. And you just wonder if he was aware of some of these ideas and then put them into a fiction, a good way of hiding things, but also expressing certain technologies that may have been available, but everybody would just thought, oh, that's fantasy. Is
right,
that is that a likely thing, or am I
very
just
both Jules Verne and H.G. Wells
right?
surrounded themselves with scientists, and we have the same example, for instance, with Nikola Tesla. Before there was a an anti-Tesla campaign against him, one of his best friends was Mark Twain,
Right.
right, and other people in his entourage were publishers of influential magazines, etc. So this is highly likely that H.G. Wells and Jules Verne did surround themselves with scientific people, which is where they got many of their ideas from.
Yes.
For instance, they were talking about submarines long before submarine was produced.
Right.
But where did they? Yeah, right.
Where did that come from?
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that's yeah. So that's really interesting. And as you say, we have lost this. And I've seen Dr. Stephen Greer saying that we've lost a century, and
That's
it
right.
would, if we hadn't, it would be amazing to see where we are now, because so much of the tyranny that we're in seems to be financially based, and of course petrochemicals and the pharmaceuticals and all of those are all, they all sort of funnel back to the same sources and the same bloodline families and things like that, which is what a lot of people, of course, do talk about. So
See, we could get rid of starvation. Everybody could have the wherewithal to cook, to clean. There wouldn't be a climate problem because you're not polluting anything.
yeah,
There wouldn't be a shortage problem because it's completely limitless. The only reason we have copper wires and because you can actually transmit electricity without any wires. You can do it like Wi-Fi, which is what Tesla wanted to do. And I'm quite convinced that the pyramids, the obelisks, Stonehenge, um,
all
all
these
these,
ancient monuments.
yes, that they were all energy making and energy transmitting as well as Wi-Fi transmitting devices. And there was a time when humanity did not know the meaning of the word starvation. I'm quite convinced that many of these monoliths, megaliths, etc., were actually there to turbocharge the seeds. So you get your crop in, you get your seeds, you put them at these places at certain times, like the solstice or the equinox or whenever, and that would actually turbocharge your seeds. And the reason I can advance that is because when you analyze a real crop circle, the crops that have actually been made, the crop circle that's actually been made by ET and not Chaz and Dave jumping about on their little boards, right?
Yeah.
Um, is that the yield is always higher and that the crops, whether it's barley or wheat, have joints in them, which are called nodes, just like a knee joint. And they're always bent at the joint. They're never bent elsewhere.
Right.
And they can be interwoven and everything else. The crop, the farmer does not lose any money on this because they do lift back up and the combine harvester can harvest them. However, the crop circle, even after it's been harvested, will still leave a trace for the next season, oddly enough.
Oh, right.
And there are electromagnetic readings that show that there has been an intervention other than earthly. And what's more, the plants are happier and healthier, which has been scientifically proven. But also, people with thyroid problems and other problems go into crop circles and they start getting better immediately.
Okay, so assuming, let's just take it all as read that we are alone, we're not alone rather, and that there are these aliens that in some way seem benevolent, because they haven't destroyed the planet, and presumably they could do with all this technology. So they haven't, and they've been visiting and watching us and going away and coming back and keeping. In this world, there are a lot of bad people
Yes.
who obviously are not the ones that the aliens really should be contacting or talking to. But there's a lot of, more humanitarian, holistic, honourable people whom it would be beneficial for us to be having conversations with visitors that have been watching us. Why, A, why is that not happening? And B, if it is happening, why do we not know about it?
Right. First of all, it's definitely happening. And their criteria, I honestly don't know. But I can tell you that astronauts, once you get them calmed down, will tell you that there hasn't been one mission into space, whether it's low Earth orbit, whether it's the International Space Station, or anywhere else, where there hasn't been an ET vehicle not far. So they do keep. I mean, you've even got film of one of Concorde's maiden flights, and you've got a little ET going around the fuselage, and this is filmed, right?
Yeah.
um, we've got film of the ET going over the fields in Wiltshire. The crop circle appears nanoseconds afterwards, and we also have wonderful film of British RAF helicopters trying to chase ETs. I mean, it's a joke,
Right.
right? So the conversations are going on. We are not told about it because they certainly don't want 0 point energy, which is a great shame because it would alleviate many of the planet's
Yes.
biggest problems: starvation, disease, irrigation for the crops, also being able to treat the used water, all the rest of it. When you have unlimited energy,
Yes.
this
But
opens up entirely new possibilities. You don't have to think
right.
like um,
But I suppose, I mean, if you imagine we're humans, we're of a certain size, and you go and you see, say, an ant colony. So real chalk and cheese, difference in intelligence and everything else. And you see the ants; they've got their intelligence, and you've got your intelligence, and let's say the ants were very poor and starving because there's no greenery or nothing. We could look at those, and we would have the choice. We could pour boiling water on them, we could stamp on them or whatever, or we could go, actually, I can put some greenery down here, or I can put the things that they need to help them, and step away, rather than just come in and talk to presumably conversations with government officials and things who are clearly the wrong people to be talking with.
that's
So,
right.
I mean, I'm making the assumption that these aliens, these ETs, are benevolent.
Not all.
Uh, and that they could. I mean, they could just come down in great numbers and say, "Hi, we're friendly," and be nice and just easily convince people.
They could. Basically, you have three groups. You have those who are benevolent, you have those who are indifferent, and then those who, quite frankly, consider us nuisance value.
Right.
So,
And why would we be a nuisance? I mean, if we're all I mean, is it because we're slowly getting into space and things?
oh, Richard, the nuclear thing, this is a big deal. How many nuclear devices do you think mankind has exploded since the first atom bomb went off at White Sands?
No idea.
2,000. It's 2,000 too many, A, for the planet. It's also 2,000 too many for ET civilizations whose electromagnetic fields in other dimensions is being severely ripped apart, disturbed, and polluted by our playing around with devices we do not have a solution for.
Right.
Because ET does actually have the technology to um, uh, cure radiation to a certain degree. And we have film of Chernobyl and Fukushima where you have ET vehicles beaming down certain energies that are actually diminishing the radioactive pollution that these disasters have engendered. Now, we shouldn't even be generating electricity with nuclear because it's so dangerous. We shouldn't have nuclear powered aircraft or submarines either. Do you have any idea how many nuclear devices are currently unaccounted for in the world, wandering around without an official owner?
I have no idea.
50 minimum. Now, that's a high risk. If you
Yes.
were an insurer, would you insure that?
Well, no,
Would you
but
underwrite that?
no, well, clearly not. And
Right.
presumably, these ones that have gone missing are in nefarious hands.
Well, I can only suspect that they are in
Yes.
very nefarious hands, yes. And the only reason that they haven't been used is probably because they don't know how to work them. And secondly, acquiring the technology to work them is very dangerous.
Right.
That's the only thing stopping certain people from using them. Which is why one does have to question the sanity of Keir Starmer when he goes over to Joe Biden with his briefcase asking for the codes to send off. I mean, really, his sanity does need seriously questioning.
Yes. I mean, one can only assume that that's all theatre.
I hope so, anyway.
Yes. But so I mean, what do you think then is going to happen in the future with our ability to communicate with aliens? Do you think that we will have, that the rest of humanity will, the disclosure will happen to the point where we just go, oh, okay, we're not alone, and this obviously is challenging people's religious beliefs and various other things?
Well, if you ask E.T., does he believe in God? And once again, I would refer you to Preston Dennett, who has lots of personal accounts of interaction between humans and ETs. ET will reply, yes, we believe in God. Now, they may have a different concept of God and a different ethical and moral code, but it definitely does exist. Now, disclosure is going to happen, but I don't think it's going to be the government speaking down to the people. I think it will
No.
be the people it will be a groundswell grassroots movement where they're going to say, look, we all know about 0 point energy. We need it. We can't go on with fossil fuels. Nuclear is out of the question. Give us the 0 point energy. And it'll be a critical mass of people that will basically force the government's hand. If they don't use 0 point energy as a solution, they then have a problem of their legitimacy as being a democratically elected government.
Well, they probably have that already.
Yes, they
Yeah,
probably do.
yeah,
Yes.
in terms of recent mandates for medical interventions.
Mm.
But so is 0 point energy something that people with, say, smaller means
Yeah.
could create and make vehicles, heating
Yes.
systems, and various things.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so
I mean, you definitely could go to developing countries like India and Africa, and with a device half the size of a shoebox, you could run an entire village.
wow.
You could drill for water. They'd have heating. They'd have lighting so the kids can do their homework in the evening. The parents can turn on some music and relax. All the rest of it, absolutely without a problem.
So I mean, this is what needs to. I mean, if the government are withholding it and the powers that be and what have you, it just needs. And I think it's Dr. Stephen Greer who said, if anyone comes up with free energy devices, is no, don't go and patent it. Just obliterate it on social media so it's out there and it's unstoppable.
That's right.
Don't do it for greed and for
That's
the
right.
money. Give it. It's a gift for humanity because people will reward you a millionfold for that. And it strikes me that that's what if people have got the 0 point energy and can do that, once it's out there and people are going, well, I don't need to deal with all this filling up with petrol or these electric cars or whatever. I'm just going to use this thing, which is, so cheap, so easy, so clean,
Yeah.
and then it would just proliferate extremely quickly.
Very, very quickly.
So if anybody out there has got one of these, please can you go and get it out there quickly, because that will save us a lot of hassle. Because
Well,
as you say, the
patent
net
is
zero
available.
policies, the whole global warming thing and all of that,
That's
the
right.
spraying of the sky would just disappear.
That's right. And the patent is there, as I said. U.S. Navy, the avionics engineer is Salvador Pais, and those patents are freely available to anyone, and is even a free working model.
And then presumably the ETs would be quite pleased because we've moved away from nuclear.
That's right.
Those that though and I mean the disinterested ones would are not going to do anything. And then maybe we can have a bit more of a communication in a nice way with the more benevolent ones.
That's right. That's right. Not only that, but we then become safe to handle. It's like
Right.
we can actually be dealt with because at the
Yes.
moment we're completely psychotic. We're being run by psychotics. We're using the most dangerous ways of generating energy, the most polluting ways. Um, and
And is that why then that you think that's why we don't have a relationship with people from another dimension or another planet or whatever? Because we are, we're the teenager who's just throwing everything everywhere, and or the drunk that you can't rationally talk to.
exactly, that is that is definitely part of the picture.
Yeah.
Now, that Stephen Greer, I don't know whether you know his CE5 program, where he actually does invite ET to come down and have a chat.
Oh right.
And he actually did a project for the French government under the presidency of Nicolas Sarkozy, this going back about 15 years, uh, where they went to a French chateau in Brittany, um, and they had three cordons of security around the chateau. And they had their French scientific community there and government officials and all the rest of it. And Stephen Greer did invite E.T. to come for a chat, which he duly did. He also set off all the alarms and had a great time. But yes, and this was sponsored by the Sarkozy government.
Wow.
So these conversations are taking place, and it's even considered highly probable that Eisenhower had a meeting with some ETs because you do have those, as I said, who are either indifferent or consider us nuisance value. And there was a big spate at certain points in our history where people were being abducted, hence the book Communion by Whitley Strieber, right? Um, and you had very interesting researchers. Dr. Carla Turner was one of the most strident, and she died in mysterious circumstances. But basically she was saying the government must know that there are human beings being abducted, undergoing invasive surgery, which is both mentally and physically traumatic. What's the government doing about it? And total silence.
Yes, I mean, you do think, what can the government sitting there going, someone's just been taken from the outback of Utah or somewhere and
Right.
taken away. And what can the government, by the time the sheriff has turned up in his car, going,
Right.
now see here, you little alien, I'm not having any of these. You can imagine that they've long gone.
Yeah. And Linda Moulton Howe did some very interesting research into this. And she had unofficial cooperation from the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, as well as the sheriffs that you were describing. And they all said, we have seen the cattle literally being taken up with an
Right.
anti-gravity field and being taken away. And then when the cadaver was put back down on the ground, she got the chief veterinary officer of Colorado, or one of the western states, and he came out and had a look, and he said the way that they have been surgically treated is at the molecular level. We're only just beginning to get there ourselves.
Right. Gosh.
So there was definitely some advanced technology. Now, is that, once again, is this ET, or is it us reverse engineering it and then doing experiments as well?
Yes.
That is a very valid question. It may not be ET who was doing that. We do
Right.
know that ET definitely has made contact with high up government officials. We do know that there have been at least 4 meetings with ETs and serious high level government officials, but the president doesn't run the show. And Bill Clinton admitted this. He said, there is part of the government I have no control over whatsoever. And he was talking about ET as well.
Gosh.
So
How
we
fascinating.
are dealing with deep state, sadly.
Yes. Yes. Golly. Well, this has been a real eye opener for me, and it's really fascinating to know that, and of course it just begs so many questions that we're, I suppose, quite impotent to knowing the answers at this stage. But over time, hopefully, things will filter down and be a bit more clearer about our neighbours in the universe.
Absolutely. And the more we talk about it amongst ourselves,
Yes.
the more we increase the critical mass of people who are aware, who have an understanding, who may or may not take the time to actually do some of their own research, buy a book, or sit in front of their laptop for 4 hours. Now,
Yes.
there are two people I'd love for you to have on. One is a gentleman called Howard Crowhurst, who is the absolute expert on megaliths and how the geometry based on the ground and the mathematics used, because it's all highly precise. There is not one accident in any of the stones that have been placed. When
Right.
they're out of place, it's because someone else has moved it since.
Right.
Um, then there is a gentleman called Carl Munt, who, instead of looking at it from the ground, looked at it from an aerial point of view, and with a series of mathematics which includes pi, cosines, the radian as opposed to the radius, 360 degrees, the megalithic yard, the 12-inch foot, basically can connect the, the pyramids of Giza with Stonehenge, and basically prove that they were all talking to each other and they all knew what each other was doing, right? That these monuments were created for both energy purposes, for agriculture, for healing, for all sorts of other things. I was thrilled to find out that the Bosnian pyramid, which is one of five, but it's the biggest of the five, uh, has actually been placed at 32,000 years old, because I've been going on about, in my little corner, about how everything's a minimum of 32,000 years old. So I was absolutely thrilled when they said it was 32,000 years old. Um, you have Göbekli Tepe, which is one of these proofs that that there was a very advanced civilization, and Göbekli Tepe is one of 14 sites which have yet to be excavated and fully understood. But Pillar 43 does tell us of a certain astral conjuncture, and that this could have been one of the floods we've managed to survive. But Göbekli Tepe, they knew it was coming because they filled these wonderful monuments in and covered them up. So they knew it was coming, and they filled
Right.
it in on purpose. This wasn't
I see. Yes.
it wasn't the result of a tornado or another natural disaster. This was done on purpose. And then I've just found out that there's a pyramid in Indonesia, which is about twice the size of the Giza pyramid, which finally has had the okay to be excavated and explored. And you'd be surprised how much mainstream archaeology actually shoots itself in the foot and
Mm.
actually prevents proper discoveries from being made, simply to keep this fairy tale going about the Egyptians built the pyramids. Well, the Egyptians didn't build the pyramids, and they even told the Greeks, Aristotle, Plato, and others who actually traveled to Egypt to speak to the high priests and thieves and elsewhere. And they said, no, it wasn't us. And Atlantis was approximately 9,000 years ago, and there was a cataclysm, etc. So the Greeks knew about this, and uh, you know, why we are covering things up. I mean, I feel my heart goes out to people like Graham Hancock because they take a hell of a lot of heat for
Yes.
simply speaking the truth.
Yes. Well, if those two gentlemen you mentioned you're able to sort of forward an email to them or an invite, or you know them and you're able to, then I'd willingly get them on the show. Or
Lovely, yeah. Howard
yeah.
Crowe has a month, and I will send you. Uh, I will definitely send you the necessary. Yeah,
So, well, listen, we come to the end of the show here because I like to just sort of keep it within the hour if possible to keep people's attention, because I know they've probably got to go and watch Coronation Street or EastEnders or whatever very truthful bits of mainstream media, or even the news, because we've all got to get our fiction from somewhere. Simon, it's been an absolute joy to talk to you. Thank you for coming on the show and introducing me to an area that I've not really delved into. And it's been a very joyful conversation.
well, thank you, Richard. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I'd love to do a follow up
Yes, why
whenever
not?
you like. And I'd
Absolutely.
also, I will definitely send you the necessary for Howard Crowhurst and Mr. Munt, and may the adventure continue.
Absolutely. Well, there we are, viewer. What did you think about that? We'd be interested in your comments down below. And of course, if you've got any other contacts, you can send them to me. But in the meantime, I'll be back with more monologues and more wonderful guests. But from Simon and I, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, goodbye.